In this episode, we take the pieces you have been learning about risk context and risk ingredients, and we turn them into a disciplined process for judging risk and recording what you found in a way other people can understand and defend. The title has 3 parts that fit together like stages of maturity. Inherent risk analysis is about understanding how risky something is before you count on any protections, which helps you see the raw exposure created by the mission, the data, the environment, and the system design. Risk evaluation is about judging that risk using agreed decision criteria, comparing it to what is acceptable, and deciding what should happen next. Documenting risk posture is about capturing the outcome as a clear picture of the system's current risk state, including what is driving risk, what is being done, and what still remains. Beginners often think risk work is mostly about filling out forms, but the real purpose is to support good decisions under uncertainty. When you can explain inherent risk, evaluate it consistently, and document posture clearly, you make risk management useful rather than ceremonial. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start by understanding why inherent risk matters, because it prevents a common mistake: confusing the existence of controls with the absence of risk. Inherent risk is the baseline risk that exists because of what the system is and what it does, even if you have not yet added protections. A system that stores sensitive personal data has higher inherent confidentiality risk than a system that stores public information, regardless of what controls you plan to add. A system that is exposed to the internet has higher inherent exposure risk than one isolated from external networks, regardless of firewalls or monitoring. A system that is critical to mission operations has higher inherent availability impact than a system that supports a minor convenience function. Inherent risk analysis forces you to face these realities early, which is important because some risks cannot be reduced below certain levels without changing the system's purpose or architecture. Knowing inherent risk helps leaders understand why certain controls and investments are necessary, and it helps engineers understand which areas need stronger designs. To perform inherent risk analysis, you begin with the risk context you established earlier, because without scope, assumptions, and decision criteria, inherent risk becomes a guessing game. You look at what is in scope, what data and functions the system supports, who uses it, where it runs, and what it depends on. You also identify plausible threat sources and event types, and you examine vulnerabilities that are inherent to the design choices, such as reliance on external identity providers or dependence on third-party components. The key is that in inherent analysis, you do not give credit for mitigations yet, because you want to understand the risk drivers themselves. For example, if the system must be reachable by external partners, that exposure is a risk driver even if you later add strong authentication. Inherent risk analysis is about asking, if this system exists, what kinds of harm are naturally plausible and how severe could they be? The output should be a clear description of the baseline exposure and potential consequences. A helpful way to keep inherent risk analysis structured is to think in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability impacts as separate lenses, because they often differ. Confidentiality inherent risk is shaped by data sensitivity, access patterns, and exposure pathways. Integrity inherent risk is shaped by how much the system's outputs are trusted and what decisions depend on them, because wrong data can cause wrong actions. Availability inherent risk is shaped by how essential the service is and how quickly disruption creates mission harm. For each lens, you consider who could cause harm, how harm could occur, and what the consequence would look like. You do not need to be exhaustive, but you should be complete enough to capture the major drivers. This approach prevents you from focusing only on dramatic breaches while ignoring integrity and availability issues that might matter more for a specific mission. It also makes it easier later to map controls to the specific kind of risk they reduce. After you have a view of inherent risk, you move into risk evaluation, which is where you judge and prioritize. Evaluation means combining likelihood and impact judgments, then comparing them to decision criteria to determine whether risk is acceptable, tolerable with mitigation, or unacceptable without significant change. Beginners sometimes think evaluation is about assigning a numeric score, but scoring is only useful if it supports consistent decisions. The heart of evaluation is reasoning. Why do you believe likelihood is at a certain level, and why do you believe impact is at a certain level? Likelihood may be influenced by exposure, ease of exploitation, and the threat environment, while impact is influenced by mission dependence and data sensitivity. Evaluation also includes uncertainty, meaning you capture where you are confident and where you have gaps in evidence. A risk evaluation that admits uncertainty is often more credible than one that pretends everything is known. When evaluation is done well, it produces a prioritized set of risks that leadership can act on rather than a flat list of concerns. At this stage, you also begin to consider existing controls, because risk evaluation is typically about current reality, not just the raw baseline. You compare inherent risk drivers to the controls that are actually in place and functioning, and you assess how much they reduce likelihood or impact. This is where you shift from inherent risk toward current or residual risk, but you must be careful not to assume controls work perfectly. A control may exist on paper but be inconsistently applied, or it may reduce risk in one dimension while leaving another dimension exposed. For example, encryption may reduce confidentiality risk for stored data, but does not prevent unauthorized access if identity and authorization are weak. Monitoring may reduce impact by improving detection, but does not prevent the initial event. Evaluation means you examine control coverage and effectiveness and adjust your risk judgments accordingly. The result is a more realistic view of how exposed the system truly is today. Risk evaluation also includes deciding what to do about each significant risk, and this is where decision criteria become operational. Common risk treatment choices include mitigating the risk by improving controls, transferring the risk through contracts or insurance, avoiding the risk by changing the system's design or scope, or accepting the risk when it falls within tolerance. The key beginner lesson is that acceptance is not ignoring. It is a deliberate decision that should be justified and recorded. Mitigation should be targeted to the risk chain, meaning you choose actions that break the pathway from threat to impact, such as reducing exposure, removing vulnerabilities, improving detection, or strengthening recovery. If you cannot mitigate a risk to an acceptable level, you may need to change requirements or architecture, which can be hard but sometimes necessary. Evaluation, therefore, is not just classification. It is decision-making that connects risk to action. Without a treatment decision, evaluation becomes an academic exercise that does not improve security. Now consider how to document risk posture, because documentation is how your analysis becomes organizational knowledge rather than a one-time conversation. Risk posture is a summary of where the system stands with respect to risk at a point in time, including major risk drivers, key mitigations, and what remains as residual exposure. A good posture document does not try to list everything. It highlights the most decision-relevant risks and explains them clearly. It should describe the scope of what was assessed, the assumptions used, and the criteria used for evaluation so the reader can understand the frame. It should also capture the rationale for major judgments, such as why a certain risk is considered high impact or why a certain control is judged effective. This is where engineering precision matters, because vague statements like the system is secure are not helpful. Instead, you want statements like the system has moderate confidentiality residual risk due to external access pathways and dependency on third-party components, with mitigation actions in progress for access governance and monitoring. Documentation must also make ownership and accountability visible, because risk posture is not just a description, it is a management tool. For each major risk, there should be clarity about who owns the risk decision and who is responsible for mitigation actions. There should also be a timeline expectation for mitigation, because a mitigation plan without time is a wish, not a plan. If a risk is accepted, documentation should capture the acceptance decision, the justification, and any conditions, such as acceptance only until a certain control is implemented. This creates a clean record that can be revisited, which is essential because systems change and risk decisions may need to be reconsidered. Good documentation protects both the organization and the people making decisions, because it shows decisions were made thoughtfully and based on available evidence. It also helps avoid repeated debates because future teams can see why earlier choices were made. A strong risk posture document also distinguishes between current reality and planned future state, because confusing the two is a classic source of false confidence. If a control is planned but not yet implemented, posture should reflect that the risk remains higher until the control is verified. If a control is partially implemented, posture should reflect partial reduction, not full reduction. This is where being clear about evidence matters, because evidence is what justifies lowering risk ratings. For example, a statement that monitoring reduces detection time should be supported by observed response performance or validated logging coverage, not only by the existence of a tool. Documentation that clearly separates now from later helps leaders make responsible decisions, such as whether to delay deployment until key mitigations are complete. It also encourages teams to close the loop by verifying controls rather than assuming they work. This is one of the simplest ways to prevent risk posture from turning into a hopeful narrative instead of a factual one. You should also learn that documenting risk posture includes capturing change, because posture is not static. The same system can move to higher risk posture when new integrations are added, when staffing changes reduce monitoring coverage, or when a new vulnerability is discovered. It can move to lower risk posture when mitigations are implemented, when access is tightened, or when resilience is improved. A mature posture practice includes tracking residual, changed, and new risks over time. But even at a beginner level, you can understand that posture is a snapshot with a history. Documenting what changed and why helps the organization learn, because it reveals which decisions reduce risk effectively and which changes accidentally increase risk. It also supports governance, because leaders want to know whether risk is trending in a safer direction or drifting into danger. Without change tracking, posture documents become stale and lose credibility. Finally, understand that inherent risk analysis, evaluation, and posture documentation are not separate chores, but a coherent reasoning chain. Inherent risk analysis tells you what the system's baseline exposure is and what drivers create that exposure. Risk evaluation tells you how that exposure compares to what is acceptable, considering controls that exist in reality and uncertainty that remains. Risk posture documentation captures the result as an accountable, reviewable picture that supports action and ongoing monitoring. If any part is weak, the whole chain suffers. Without inherent analysis, you do not understand why risk exists. Without evaluation, you do not know what to do. Without documentation, you cannot defend decisions or manage change. When you treat these steps as an integrated discipline, risk management becomes a practical tool for building and operating secure systems. That is exactly what this certification expects you to be able to do. Reason clearly, decide responsibly, and leave a trail of evidence that shows how you got there.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.